How's everybody doing today? Doing good? Well, I'm hoping to touch on something that we probably don't really talk about a lot in the church. And just a quick background, literally 10 seconds timing. My name is Torrez. Been doing this for 16 years. I know I look young. I try to keep a fade as much as possible to cut the gray hairs off and stuff. But I do have 4 kids. I have a 17-year-old, a 14-year-old, 8 and 9-year-old. 2 girls are older, 2 boys are younger. In my life, it's kind of crazy. Just this last week, it was crazy. A bunch of stuff going on, just like most of you. But all of my kids are in sports, competitive sports, on top of full-time with the church and youth ministry and all that crazy stuff. Anybody kind of have that same story? Yeah, in the back over there, over here? Yeah, so it's crazy. And to top it off, the cherry on top of this crazy week that's every week, it just seems like it never stops. Last night, I literally dropped my phone in the toilet. Yeah, I know, right? You sound like you did that before. And so, it's crazy that I get this topic, and the topic is running on fumes. Running on fumes because all these great ideas and all this stuff that we do doesn't really matter when statistics say that the average youth worker is going to only be around 18 months. That's a crazy statistic when we know that we got kids that minimum are in high school for 4 years, right? Crazy. So all this craziness in 16 years of urban ministry and 16 years of youth work really doesn't scare me that much because it's to be expected. So if you're new in ministry, kind of get used to it because it just gets crazy all the time, especially when you have kids all over. It's just one of those things to get used to. So those 3 in the morning phone calls, hey, it is what it is, right? And I just want to say something though real quick. I feel like I'm more on my way out of youth work than I am on my way in. Does that make sense? Let me explain that. See, when I came into youth ministry, it was all exciting. Nobody told me about the crazy stuff that we'd be dealing with. Nobody told me about 18-month turnaround on youth pastors. I guess I could have figured that out because when I came to church at 15, from 15 to 18, I already had 4 youth pastors. Crazy. And I was Raymond. I didn't know anything about God or church or anything, so it was all weird to me. But one thing a couple questions I want to ask is, what are the causes, results, and potential prevention of the many failures of leaders that cause people to step out, leave everything that at one point they turned to the youth pastor or somebody else in ministry or something, their wives, their families, and everything, and said, I am called to this. This is what God has for me. And it trips me out that we have such a high turnover. So what are some of those causes? What personal issues may plague people in their exercise of leadership? Why are so many leaders running on fumes? And see, there's kind of like a paradox of sorts. And it exists in the lives of most leaders who've experienced significant failures. And this is one thing that I want to really dig in, because every one of us have some things deep inside of us that really kind of poke maybe some personal insecurities, some feelings of inferiority, a need for parental approval, especially growing up in a high-capacity family, challenged and pushed to be in sports, to get that catch, to get that tackle, to run, to do all this and that and this, and run from this schedule to that schedule, and it gets crazy, and then all of a sudden you get a report card, and God forbid, there's a B+ on it. And it wasn't the best that you could have done, right? And so, a lot of these things compel leaders to become successful leaders, right? Because we're always on this grind, this drive. But at the same time, it was very often these same issues that precipitated our failures as leaders. And so many leaders are running on fumes because of never addressing the areas of our lives that have been hidden from others. And we call this our dark side. Turn to your neighbor and say, our dark side. I wish I had some Darth Vader music right now. Many times our dark side will blindside us. And some of the examples of this are our personalities have been slowly intermingled with examples, emotions, expectations, a bunch of different experiences over a lifetime that have created our dark side from way back to when we were kids. The raw material for our dark side is pride to start. It's always linked to failure and stumbling. You could just look up Proverbs 6. I'm not going to dig into that, but you can take notes and look it up later. But pride, wrong motives prevent accountability. Selfishness always leaves chaos and disorder. And self-deception, probably one of the biggest things. Because when we have 50, 100, 150 kids, everything's all right. but we fool ourselves with the wrong motives, and we're careful to justify our plans and goals as good and right, leaving the final judgment to the Lord. Oh, the Lord will judge me, right? And so how does the dark side develop? It stems from family. It stems from our childhood. It stems from adolescence. It stems from things that we can draw back. If you haven't already, and if you haven't thought about some of this stuff, like, why do I respond? Why when that person in the staff meeting, when they said something, did it just boil up inside? Anybody ever say something in a staff meeting and you're just like, ugh? You just get that feeling inside of you, and you just want to respond back. Is that just me sometimes? Right? Right? Everyone's laughing, but nobody's raising their hand because maybe their staff person's right next to them. She's like, I don't care. He's right here. Right? But it's where does that come from? Why? And my hunch is, and from what I've seen in my own life and a lot of other leaders' lives, is that it stems from things and ways that we've grown up. And so many positions of leadership have sensed some vague, inexplicable drive to make significant marks in their lives. And this leads to a vague sense of ambition, a profound need to be approved, right? An irrational fear that their work isn't adequate. Anybody ever feel like that? Like, man, I've been doing everything, it seems like, to grow this ministry, and I only had 2 kids show up. That's a true story. We set up a whole Christmas thing one time and went all out. And I felt so bad for our youth pastor at the time. He went all out and shows up, and there were 2 kids. Guess whose kids they were? I have a 14 and 17-year-old. So, irrational fear, our work is inadequate. A need to feel an absolute control of every circumstance. Anybody ever feel like that? Like our leaders just are there. They ain't doing nothing because we're out doing everything, and the youth pastor's running around like crazy. Any youth ministries ever feel like that? Youth pastors ever feel like that? I've been there before. A tendency toward perfection. The only time I remember hearing words of approval was when I finally got that good report card. And so I would turn that in, and it's like, oh man, I did good. And so I learned from a very young age that the harder I work and the more I do, the more approval I get, the better I felt. Well, shouldn't I just feel good about who I am already? Right? And it's crazy how we're conditioned. So other behaviors include overeating, compulsive spending, alcoholism, compulsive exercise. These aren't urban issues. These are across every class, every generation, all over the place. How can somebody in the most prominent positions in the world commit adultery on their wives? Right? Some of the most prominent positions in the church do some of the craziest things that we would have never thought. And so there's literally like a pyramid of needs. And I'm going to fly through this part, but it starts out with safety. When we don't feel safe, it brings about insecurities. Physiological needs is first thing. It's the basic stuff: hunger, thirst, sexual frustration, tension, fatigue, illness. Safety is the next one. And when you don't feel safe, there's a sense of insecurity, yearning, sense of loss, fear, obsession. If you don't feel loved at times, there's a sense of self-consciousness, feeling unwanted, worthless. And then esteem, feeling of incompetence, negativism. This is just stuff the enemy just plays with in our heads sometimes, right? Like, he's just having a heyday sometimes around us. And the last one is self-actualization, alienation, boredom, limited activities. And this is why is it that they say 70 to 80% of youth pastors are dipping and dabbling in pornography, and they're running and hiding? What's going on deep inside that we feel like we have to withdraw into this dark place and get this validation? And so some of this part of our dark side that we don't really talk about a lot, and I'm going to fly through this, is a compulsive leader. What does that look like? Status conscious, looking for reassurance and approval from authorities, controls activities, workaholics, keeping order, excessive, moralistic, conscientious, and at the heart, a rebellious attitude, angry and resentful. Sometimes, that's my profile sometimes, if I'm going to be honest. The narcissistic leader, driven to succeed by a need for admiration and acclaim. This is stuff we don't really talk about. Overinflated sense of importance, great ambitions. We don't need a partner with that youth ministry. We got enough going on here. We don't need anybody else. And it's so awesome to see so many different youth workers in one room, by the way. But self-absorbed, uncertainty. I've seen urban and suburban, it doesn't matter, have these traits. A paranoid leader. Paranoid that the next youth worker is going to take their kids if we go and hang out at their youth event. Afraid of anything or anyone. Characteristically suspicious and hostile. Hypersensitive to the actions and reactions of those they lead. Thinking that that person is going to take your position one day. Codependent. Failure to confront and deal with inappropriate behavior. Always in fear of hurting somebody's feelings. Anybody ever not want to address something just because it's too hard, and wouldn't it be nice if the problem would just float away? Right? Passive aggressive. Prone to short outbursts. Anybody ever been around somebody that just it seemed like everything was good, and then all of a sudden this dude just blew up, and you're just like, whoa, what's going on here? Calm down there. Hold up, wait a minute. Right? And so it's very dangerous. All these issues that we're dealing with in our lives, if we don't address these things, because remember, these are the very things that will drive us to be successful. They will push us, because when you have a competitive spirit, think about that. That's going to drive you to be successful. Successful all the way into some of the most prominent positions in a church at times. But I always wonder, how can somebody at such a high level, and I'm not judging, I'm just thinking because I'm in all of a sudden these positions, right? And I'm just how can somebody at such a high level in leadership be in a position like that? And I wonder how many small groups this person's been in, how many men's accountability groups this person's been in, and still messed up, right? We still drop the ball. Because we're not consistently addressing this dark side and taming it, so to speak. The compulsive leader can end up self-righteous, legalistic, a workaholic, I mentioned that already, the urge to control. The narcissistic leader, the exploiting their people, using people for their own ends. And we may not feel like it sometimes, but are we really concerned with the soul care of people? I could care less about youth ministry ideas anymore now. I'm more concerned with the person. Are you going to be here at the second year of Open Denver? Are you going to be here at the third year of Open Denver? Right? Are you going to be here serving a ministry? The passive-aggressive leader, the codependent leaders, there's all these different things, and constant state of denial for a paranoid leader, acute distrust, warfare between parties, and the codependent leader meets every other need while ignoring their own family and their own needs. Uncontrolled outbursts and erratic are the passive-aggressive leader. And so we need to refuel. And we hear all this stuff all the time. And refueling, it's going to take work. But the first step is kind of like AA, you got to admit your dark side. That we all have a dark side, right? We all have it. It exists. And we got to start digging into our lives. We got to go into our past. We got to look at our childhood. We got to see what's really driving me. What is the stuff that's really pushing me? And what's really providing these motives for my life? Is it because I like the position? Is it because that I like to succeed? When we hit that 100 kid mark, man, that just made me so good. And then when we hit 99, I was depressed for a week or two. Right? What is that? Where does that come from? Why is that? And what I found out even in my own life was the reason why I was such a perfectionist is because I grew up in a little bit of a rough family. And so I noticed that I'm going to strive to do as many things as perfect as possible, because when my mom would come home, there would be this crazy blow up in the house if the kitchen wasn't swept. And so I had to make sure every detail was done correctly. And so it literally drove me in my adult life to be a perfectionist, and I had to say, whoa, hold up, that's unhealthy to expect certain things of my leaders and have these unrealistic expectations. So the next one is resist the poison of expectations, human traditions, spiritual standards of measure not entirely supported by Scripture, legalism. Some of these things that people push on us, healthy expectations can motivate, communicate that we have confidence in people. We want to have healthy expectations, not unrealistic expectations. So resist the poison. Practice progressive self-knowledge. Listen, this is all basics. These are our spiritual disciplines. Someone was talking what, spiritual disciplines? They didn't really know what to expect from that. But as I get ready to close, I want to challenge you guys to dig into these, because these spiritual disciplines I always trip out on the fruit of the Spirit, how it's love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness. And last one, self-control. Man, I just want me to be pretty disciplined in my life, but I'm going to need some help. So one of the major things is obviously digging into Scripture. Everybody knows that. Personal retreats. Where have we grown sloppy? What are we neglecting? Devotionals, journaling, personality profiles, accountability groups, We need to have some brothers that you can then ask real questions like, yo, when's the last time you played with your kids? When's the last time you took your wife on a date? When's the last time you actually dug in? Or when's the last time you got on the internet and were searching for some girls? Same thing with ladies. We need those people who can ask those real questions, not, oh, it's so awesome what you did. It's so great what you're doing in ministry. But then 16 months later, they're like, what happened to that dude? Right? And so the last thing is understanding your identity in Christ. I left some reading materials up there that have really helped me out. And a lot of this stuff I pulled from this book, Overcoming the Dark Side of Leadership. But all these books changed my life. And I wish I would have read them the first 10 years of ministry. Because they did ministry so unhealthy. And I really, really wish that I would have had some people in my life back then. I was a lucky one that kind of fumbled through and made it out on the other end. But most youth workers, they don't last. And so I want to encourage you to, one, pick up some reading material, figure this out for yourself, and pull 2 or 3 guys, 2 or 3 girls together and say, yo, I need some accountability in my life, and be real and not fake, and say, hey, this is what's going on in my life. And so I don't want you guys to run on fumes. I want to challenge you and encourage you at the same time to say, you can do it. You can be here 2 years from now. Forget that statistic. That's not us. Turn to your neighbor and say, that's not going to be you. Thank you.